We've got a couple of things to go over before we get into this one. First, if you are listening to this with a child, please do not do that. The unfortunate truth is that our history is often marred with tragedy, bloodshed, and tears, and in fact I've heard history described as the long documentation of human misery, which sometimes feels very accurate. And this will probably be one of those times. Maybe one day, if I get time and money and more fans than just like my mom, I could do an All the People Jr., something that's for the kids. But I have neither time nor money nor fans, so that's going to be on hold for a minute. I actually asked a professor of mine once how they studied history all the time without becoming just completely depressed. To which she responded, I drink a lot of water and I watch a lot of good comedians. So, maybe get some of those ready. Second, to the nation of Poland, I apologize in advance for all of the names that I am sure to mispronounce in this episode. But I promise I'll do my best. And finally, good news, this show is now available at basically every major podcasting app. It's great. We've hit the holy podcast trinity of Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, and Spotify, as well as a few other major distributors. So now that you're free to use the app of your choice, go ahead and subscribe, review, rate, whatever you do, and follow the show on Instagram at AllThePeoplePod to keep up and stay in touch. With that, fill your hydro flask, cue up some stand-up comedy, and buckle your seatbelts because we're going to Auschwitz. This is the story of Witold Pilecki. Covering such a heavy topic is crazy hard. If I set my tone in a serious way, then it'll probably ruin everybody's day, or weeks, honestly. And if I try to be lighthearted and divert away from the rawness of the truth, then it feels irreverent and disrespectful to the millions of victims of this tragedy. I think the only way to really nail the delivery on this one is to focus on the silver lining, which in this case is paper thin but brilliantly bright. Pilecki was born May 13, 1901 in Olonets, Russia. His father was a Russian civil service worker, and so they moved around quite a bit. Their family first settled in Olonets, where Witold was born, but in 1910 the family was relocated to Wilno, which is currently Vilnius, Lithuania. This is not starting out well. There's a lot worse names than that one. It was here in Wilno that Pilecki first joined the ZHP Scouts organization. And to the best of my understanding, the ZHP Scouts were sort of like if the Boy Scouts just straight up trained American kids to deploy to the Middle East. It wasn't officially a military organization, but so many of its members were involved with or eventually enlisted in the military that it would later be deemed a criminal organization by the Nazis after their occupation of Poland. I mean, here's an English translation of their anthem, and it sounds pretty hardcore, so you could see how maybe somebody could think of it as like a pseudo-military group.
Everything we have we give to Poland. She is our life, so we go on to live. The dawn is rising. Let's open the gates. We have our order. Stand up, into the sun. Toughen yourself. Crush your weakness. Exert your soul to serve the homeland. On her call to the battle or to help. Glad goes the kindred Polish scouts and guides. Kindred of Polish scouts and guides.
I know you're probably wondering if I just used American military music to be a bed behind my rendition of the Polish ZHP Scouts anthem. And that's, yeah, I did do that. Probably out of all of the laziness and cultural ignorance. As far as I can tell, the ZHP is still active, so good work. Keep it up. Scouts are cool. After the German occupation of Wilno during World War I, the Pileckis fled to Mogilev in modern-day Belarus, This is. I'm sorry to Europe, all of it, all the parts of Europe. In the next year, they would move again to Oriol, Russia, where Witold would found his own ZHP group. Oriol, Russia, where Witold would found his own ZHP group. In 1918, following the outbreak of the Russian Revolution and the defeat of the Central Powers in World War I, Pilecki returned to Wilno and then joined the Polish Second Republic, which is what that turned into for a minute. And he joined a ZHP scout section of the Lithuanian Belarus Self-Defense Militia, which, if you notice, I just said ZHP scout and then Self-Defense Militia, so they get very, very closely related. During the Polish-Soviet War, he would be rewarded with the Cross of Valor for gallantry. Following the conclusion of the Polish-Soviet War in March 1921, Pilecki was transferred to the Army Reserves, and he was promoted to the rank of corporal. And he was designated as a non-commissioned officer, which I don't actually know what that means, so military people out there, maybe fill me in. Pilecki later underwent officer training at the Cavalry Reserve Officers Training School. In September 1926, Pilecki became the owner of his family's ancestral estate, which he rebuilt and modernized the property's manor house, which had been completely destroyed during World War I. And it was there that he found his love. He got married, had a couple kids, but the good times didn't last. In 1939, Pilecki was mobilized to defend his nation from the quickly rising Nazi death machine, and shortly after mobilizing, he was part of the secret Polish army, which he actually helped to co-found. The secret army would conduct a mission so harrowing that it is almost too crazy to believe. In the early stages of the war, the Polish resistance knew that the Nazis had built this large prison structure, but nobody really knew how they ran it or exactly what they were doing. So, the secret Polish army asked for a volunteer to allow themselves to be captured and taken to Auschwitz. Pilecki volunteered and started drafting a plan to execute this mission. Pilecki presented his plan to his superiors, and after some debate they accepted it. Pilecki would place himself in the middle of a Gestapo sweep and hope to be taken to Auschwitz. His plan is insanely risky, though, because not only did he face the risk of getting killed on site during the raid, but there are plenty of other places that he could have gone. The Nazis had other jails and camps at this point. But, amazingly, it worked, and he was taken to Auschwitz. Pilecki was a man of action, though, and in fact he later recalled having to fight back the urge to rebel against the Nazis during the raid. He looked around at all of his other Polish men and was disturbed by their pack mentality. He thought that if he could organize them, that they could resist the Nazi invaders, and on the train ride to Auschwitz he lost control of this part of himself as he and hundreds of other men tried to jump from the train. Once the Nazis realized that hundreds of men were trying to jump off the train, they were beaten with clubs. 10 men were pulled from the group and shot on the spot. The SS officers asked one man what his profession was, and after replying that he was a doctor, they beat him to death in front of the other prisoners. After that, everyone was shaved, assigned a number, and marched out for their first roll call. Pilecki recalled that one officer told them, "Let none of you imagine that he will leave this place alive. The rations have been calculated so that you will only survive 6 weeks." He recalled another officer telling them that the only way out of Auschwitz is through the chimney, and Pilecki instantly knew that he was not dealing with an ordinary prison. Okay, so that is unfortunately just the beginning, but before we get too deep into all these horrible details, let's take some time, take a breath, hear from a sponsor. Alright, maybe you're like me and you've tried to start a podcast 30 times, but you quit every time because it's just too dang hard. Well, If that's true, you need to check out Anchor. Why? Because, well, first, it's free, which is a great reason to try anything. But second, it's got creation tools right inside the app that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer. Super convenient. Also, it helps you distribute your podcast, which in my opinion is by far the hardest and most obnoxious part. And you can make money from it with no minimum listenership. It's got everything you need to make a podcast right in one place, which is crazy convenient. And that's what we all want, really. So if you're interested, download the free Anchor app today or go to anchor.fm to get started. As Pilecki and the other prisoners starved, bedbugs and lice feasted on what was left of their bodies. Work assignments pushed them to the brink of death, and guards delighted in their torture. Just in order to survive, prisoners often turned to stealing and betraying each other, but Pilecki couldn't be beaten into submission. He began to organize a secret resistance. At its peak, there were nearly 1,000 members in this group. They would steal and distribute extra food to the hungry and hide the sick and infirm from guards to keep them from work assignments. And in an unimaginably violent and desperate world, not one of them betrayed or stole from each other, with the exception of one incident where a spy infiltrated their group, which sounds bad but actually was just a minor setback, all things considered. In the early years of the war, particularly wealthy prisoners were able to buy their way out of Auschwitz. Alexander Wilepolski was one of those men. His family paid the bribe and he was able to leave, but before he left, Pilecki gave him his first message. He instructed Wilepolski to meet up with his friends in the secret army and tell them to bomb Auschwitz, even with him inside. Pilecki instructed him to say that it would be merciful. The secret army was actually able to relay this message to the British, who considered the idea but were unable to act on it. They didn't have enough planes, fuel, or intel to make such a crazy decision, so Pilecki and the other prisoners just had to wait, and struggled to survive. Though his first message didn't result in action, he continued to send them, by both escaping prisoners and notes passed to Polish farmers in the surrounding areas. Each message gets more extreme. The Nazis were conducting disgusting medical experiments on the patients, was the next one. And then, after that, the Nazis killed thousands of Soviet POWs in mass executions. And then, the Nazis were testing a way to gas prisoners en masse. The camp is expanding, huge trainloads of Jews being murdered and cremated, hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children being slaughtered. Pilecki's messages are a timeline of the camp's evolution. Everything that we know about Auschwitz today was documented by Pilecki in his notes. After nearly 2.5 years of trying to prompt action with his notes, though, he decided that he needed to act for himself. His frail body couldn't stand a fight, and an insurrection would mean certain death for everybody. So, in the spring of 1943, he and 2 friends escaped through the bakery. They snuck into Warsaw, and he was briefly reunited with his wife. This reunion wasn't a happy ending, though. Plagued by PTSD, Pilecki struggled to connect with his friends and family. He was consumed with writing about his experiences day and night. In 1944, the Soviets began pushing the Germans westward out of Poland, and seeing a crack in the armor, he, as well as thousands of others, tried to push the Germans out themselves in the Warsaw Uprising. The revolution failed, though, and ultimately the Soviets came in to sweep up the pieces. By the time the Soviets liberated Auschwitz, 1.1 million people had been killed there. To put that into perspective, that's nearly the entire population of Seattle and Portland, Oregon combined. It's easy for observers in the West to forget that for so many people the war didn't end with the fall of Hitler. Stalin was there to pick up all the pieces that Nazi Germany left behind, and as such turned many nations into puppet states and locked them behind the Iron Curtain, Poland included. And though the Soviet occupation of Poland would last for nearly 4 decades, Pilecki remained dedicated to the idea of a free Poland until his death, which, unfortunately, was only 2 years after Auschwitz was liberated. He had been sending messages to British intelligence, and after being discovered was tortured and publicly executed as an enemy of the state. Pilecki's records were buried until the 90s, and that's why we didn't really know about him. His legacy for nearly 4 decades was that of a traitor. This brings up one of the most difficult aspects about studying history. There's a popular saying that history is written by the victors, but to quote lyricist Garrett Russell, the victor writes the story, but more often burns the manuscripts. One of the most common ways that a people group is systemically subjugated is by having their history erased. This happened in the New World when Europeans first came over. They would write of these barren, uninhabited landscapes while thousands of native people were just living there still, right in front of them. But writing them out of the narrative makes it easier to justify mistreatment. A people group becomes less than once people are convinced that they have no heritage. It's easy to build a dairy farm on top of an ancient ritual ground when you've been taught that those things didn't exist in the first place. The same was done by Russia to its satellite states. Someone who should have been applauded as one of the world's greatest heroes died the death of a traitor. His achievements were buried and his narrative changed. Witold Pilecki was made a criminal simply because the wrong people got to write the story for too long. That has changed, however, and now Pilecki has rightfully been celebrated as one of World War II's greatest heroes, but for most of their adult life, his children thought that he was a traitor. Something that I ask myself when I'm writing for school or whatever is, so what? Who cares? It's kind of a fun little exercise that I hope to pass down to my students one day, but what it really does is force you to consider what happened in the story and exactly, how you could apply it to your life. So why should we care about Pilecki? Honestly, Pilecki's story should inspire us to persevere. It should remind us that being a hero often means going without recognition, and that courage is usually the ultimate superpower. So, with that, be courageous, persevere, have a nice week.